In this video on developing an analysis, we're going to take a break from using NVivo directly, and we'll consider methods of analysis, research design, and also validity in qualitative research. Having already immersed ourselves in the data and gained a good overview of the data to the extent that we could give a good description of the data set, we're now in a position to move on to what I would call analysis. Now, of course, what you've done so far is all analysis, but it's a kind of general analysis to understand the data set. What we need to do now is to start thinking more directly about the research questions and about your research design, as we need to use an approach that will help you to answer those research questions. The key thing to remember is that you are the analyst, and all qualitative analysis methods are possible within NVivo. So I'm often then asked, well, what method should I use? Now, if you've got to the position of analysing your data without thinking about what method of analysis you should use, then really that's the wrong way round. It doesn't mean all's lost, and I'm sure it'd be possible to find a way, an appropriate way of analysing your data now. But ideally, this is something that you need to discuss and agree with your supervisors prior to collecting your data. And for the many good reasons, but the one reason I'll focus on here is that the kind of interviews that you conduct will relate to your research design and the kind of worldview you're taking about knowledge and the development of knowledge. Now, if, for instance, you are primarily conducting a survey and you're doing a few interviews to help support that questionnaire survey, you'll very likely be using more structured questions, and the interviews might be quite short. Whereas if you're using, say, an ethnographic approach, you might have very in-depth information, and interviews may be more informal and more conversational in style, potentially. And all this then will relate to the kind of analysis method that you'll want to choose. So, as I said, all methods are possible with NVivo, because NVivo doesn't do the analysis for you. It's a tool that you use and you build as you build your analysis, but with that knowledge in your head about how you're going to approach analysis. So if, for instance, you're going to do a thematic analysis, you need to read up on thematic analysis. Okay, so there's no button you can press in NVivo to say do a thematic analysis. There's no button you can press that says do a discourse analysis. But all the methods you can see here are possible, and they're not limited to these 7 approaches. Now, that might seem obvious, but it is really important, because many, many times students attend NVivo courses without having first taken any course sometimes in qualitative research methods. And in some ways that doesn't matter, but it is a hole to fill. So perhaps the good news is that you won't need to become an expert in every single method of qualitative analysis, which will probably take a lifetime. And with your supervisor, you'll work out an approach And that will give you your one or maybe two approaches that you'll need to learn about. Now, the qualitative analysis page and the thematic analysis page that go alongside the Getting Started with NVivo course and Stepping Up NVivo courses help you, give you a stepping stone along the way to get started. So, key thing then, all methods are possible, but you remain the analyst. And if you're not sure about the method you're going to use, discuss with your supervisor and read up about that particular analyst way of analysing your data. So, all approaches will require you to have read your data carefully. So, if you've watched the video on immersing yourself in the data, writing annotations and memos, that would apply across the board. And generally, although there are many methods, they either fall into a more emergent approach, whereas you're developing your framework of analysis, you're developing and building your coding structure as you work through and perhaps taking several iterations before you're ready to say, yeah, that's my final outcome. So it tends to be an emergent approach where you're not going in with predefined conceptual framework. On the other hand, it may be a more deductive approach where you know there's a conceptual framework, it's already been published, it seems very relevant to your research and you want to test out, will that work with my data? Or perhaps I might need to make some amendments to that particular framework, which would become an output, an outcome of your own analysis. So with the emergent approach, you're going to go into analysis without really knowing what your coding structure, what your coding framework would be. Whereas if you're taking a deductive approach, your coding framework would be set up and you can input it into your NVivo project and work with it. Now that sounds rather binary in a way. Often the approaches are not entirely emergent or they're not entirely deductive. Because often we are coming in with some knowledge and having read and seen other research and having read our own interviews as well, that we're aware that there will be certain coding, certain themes perhaps that are really important, particularly as we focus around our research questions. So often we're not a blank sheet when we approach analysis. So there can be deductive elements and inductive elements. And that's important to take note of. And my approach would be to build on the author coding and use the author coding to help build an initial framework. And then we'd move to more manual coding across the data set. Now, when I say going across the data set, that's another decision to make. So depending on your research questions, it might be that you don't really care who said what. You've got your data set and you want themes that are going to help you answer the questions, the research questions, and they go across the data set. It doesn't matter if interviewee A said such and such, or if it was interview B or interview C, it doesn't matter. And we'd go across the data set in that way. However, in other kinds of research, we want to retain the person as the unit of analysis. So, for instance, if I was doing a narrative analysis of the interviewees in the Careerscapes dataset, I'd want to look within each interview and look at the narrative and help to identify the narratives within each interview. So I'd be going within that unit of analysis, as opposed to the thematic analysis where we don't care who said what, we develop themes across the data set. If you've got a large data set, you may also be wanting to make comparisons. So you might want to compare, what do the older participants say? How do what the older academics say compare with the younger early career academics? And again, there we've got a different unit of analysis. And at that point, I'd be directing you to the Stepping Up NVivo course, because we really need to get to grips with cases, because through cases and understanding of cases in NVivo, we can start to compare groups, and sometimes in quite complex ways. But we're focusing here on the Getting Started with NVivo course. So in this case, we're going to go across the data set. So you'll have a video. The next video will go across the data set, drawing on thematic analysis. And then the video after that will take a more narrative approach. And then we'll also look at how we might bring theory to bear to help use theory to answer our questions. So the point of these 3 videos then is to move from describing the data to enabling us to give an interpretation of the data that goes beyond that and answers research questions in a less descriptive way. So another question I'm often asked is around validity in qualitative research. And that's an important question and something that NVivo can help very much with. Now, if I look at this paper, I noticed one of the authors, Cathy Cassell, and Cathy, through Methods at Manchester, provides videos on this very topic, on quality and qualitative research. And I particularly recommend viewing this video, What is Good Qualitative Research? So you can see the address here. So you've got a whole lecture there on what is good qualitative research, with some references and slides there addressing the question. It's an important question to ask. Oh, I think I'm on that one. But it requires us to start to think in terms of different kinds of knowledge. So basically, qualitative research for a long time was considered a poor cousin to quantitative and more scientific approaches. And the more positivist, post-positive viewpoints, more realist research, was looking at research and validity in terms of whether it is replicable. Now, if you conducted an interview one day and then you go and conduct it the next day with the same person, You wouldn't expect to get exactly the same data, exactly the same words said in that interview. Whereas if you were to measure me one day, and then you measure me again the next day, I'll be surprised if I vary from 163 centimeters. And if I do, that would be a researcher error. And there are various ways of looking at validity in science, in scientific research. And I have a paper here as well from Amphara paper. All the links are available on the page. So if we're taking more of a positivist approach, we'd be using terms such as internal validity. Is the experiment, is it internally valid? Is it externally valid? Can we generalize? Is it reliable? Will I get the same measurement tomorrow if I repeat the experiment? Is it objective? Now, what's sometimes talked about as a qualitative turn was really a way of contesting these notions of validity and saying, well, in qualitative research, we need something different. And often, if you're taking more of a, what I would say, a mainstream interpretivist approach, I'm thinking about Gruber and Lincoln, they'd be using terms such as credibility, transferability, dependability, confirmability in place of these quantitative positivist terms. And the strategies employed to gain credibility and establish transferability, dependability, confirmability. We've got some examples here listed. So it comes back to the whole research project and your whole research design. In terms of NVivo, NVivo is excellent at helping you to create a detailed audit trail that helps you to show the transparency of your process of your analysis. And that can be very important in a number of different qualitative approaches. Of course, there are others. And if I go back to this paper, go back to this paper to a different, I think we've got a different table here. Oop. A different table here, but we'd need to look at different approaches. So for instance, with critical theory, often it's reflexivity in the research that's important, in which case it would be really vital that you're keeping a really good and detailed, up-to-date research journal. But also validity is thought about in different ways. One term is called catalytic validity. That is, we want the process of taking part in the research to have an impact on the participants, have a positive impact on the participants. As you can see, it's not straightforward, but I don't want to overcomplicate it either. And for most people, if this is your first project, qualitative project, you'll probably be looking at these terms here. It's from Gruber and Lincoln. Okay. And the takeaway is you want to keep your process transparent. So when you're writing up the research, you want to be able to say, well, I've gone through these stages and here's some examples of what I've done in stage 1. And then I thought about the data in a different way. And here's some examples of what I did. So we don't need to overcomplicate it. But often asked about validity in qualitative research. How do we know what we've done is good? How is it going to stand up? And it isn't just about having a good analysis. It's also about having, really good data collection and having a research design that fits. Yeah, so I'm just going to go here. So this is from a book by Crotty called The Foundations of Social Research, and provides a nice way of looking at research design. So we've got epistemology, and that's leading perhaps to a theoretical perspective. If you're taking a theoretical perspective, perhaps looking at social capital, for instance, and that might feed into your choice of methodology and your choice of methods. Okay, so example here. Yeah, so we might have, say, we're taking a constructivist approach using symbolic interactionism, undertaking an ethnography. I'm going to be using as a method participant observation. Okay, so we probably have a very conversational style of observations, field notes, perhaps some informal interviews, etc. So that would be quite different from, it's more objectivist, positivist, survey research, statistical analysis, and perhaps some open-ended questions, and we want to analyse those open-ended questions within NVivo. Okay, so we'd be taking different approaches, and what we're aiming to get from our analysis would be quite different and need different approaches to analysis. And again, NVivo won't do it for you, so you have to get clear in your mind what it is you want to do with your data. And that's through reading a good book. So definitely recommend the book by Carla Willig, and that's available on the reading list. But also these key questions here are so important. Do discuss with your supervisors, and ideally discuss before collecting your data. And of course, you've got to go through the ethics process. So such techniques will need to be agreed beforehand. So I hope this video is helpful in giving an overview and perhaps answering some questions. And a key takeaway is, if you don't feel comfortable about how you're going to analyse the data, do watch the next couple of videos. And they show you how you can work with NVivo, but also read up on the particular method of analysis that you're going to use. Okay, so as I said, the qualitative analysis page and the thematic analysis page got lots of information and lots of pointers to help you get started. So that's the end of this video.